Today I will explain dark ages of Greek history. Let's start. The story begins in silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence that follows collapse. Around 1200 BCE, the great Mycenaean world of Greece begins to fall apart. Palaces that once echoed with footsteps of kings, scribes, and warriors are suddenly abandoned. Massive stone walls still stand, but inside them, fires burn, roofs fall in, and life drains away. No single moment marks the end. It happens slowly, like a long night settling over the land. For centuries before this, Greece had been a place of power. Mycenaean kings ruled from fortified palaces like Mycenae, Pylos, and Turins. They controlled trade routes across the Aegean. They wrote records in linear B script. They stored grain, bronze weapons, oil, and wine. They sent ships across the sea and warriors into battle. This was the world later Greeks would remember only as legend, the age of Agamemnon, Achilles, and Troy. Then it breaks. Earthquakes shake the land. Fires destroy palaces. Trade routes collapse. Bronze, once common, becomes rare. The written records stop. One by one, the centers of power disappear. Nobody knows exactly why it all happens. Some blame invading groups, often called the Sea Peoples. Others point to internal rebellions, climate change, famine, or a system that grew too complex to survive stress. The truth is likely a mix of everything. What matters is the result. The old world dies. As the palaces fall, so does order. Without kings and centralized control, the countryside empties. People leave cities and move into hills, valleys, and remote places where they can survive quietly. Populations shrink. Villages become small and scattered. Roads fall apart. Ports grow silent. Greece, once connected to the wider Mediterranean, turns inward. This is the beginning of what historians later call the Greek Dark Ages. The name sounds dramatic, but the darkness is not just about suffering. It is about absence. No great buildings, no written records, no clear voices from the past. For nearly 4 centuries, from around 1100 BCE to 800 BCE, Greece leaves almost no written trace of itself. History fades into shadow. Life during this time becomes simpler, but harder. People farm small plots of land. They raise animals. They live in wooden houses instead of stone palaces. Wealth is measured in survival, not luxury. Iron slowly replaces bronze, not because it is better at first, but because it is easier to find. Iron tools spread quietly, changing daily life one object at a time. Without writing, memory becomes everything. Stories are no longer carved into tablets. They are carried in voices. Around hearth fires, elders speak of heroes, wars, and lost cities. These stories change with each telling, growing larger, more dramatic, more mythical. Gods gods walk among humans. Heroes fight monsters. The past becomes legend, and legend becomes identity. Religion also shifts. The old palace gods fade, but belief does not disappear. Instead, worship becomes local and personal. Small shrines appear. Sacred spaces are marked by stones, trees, or simple altars. The gods of later Greece begin to take shape, not fully formed, but slowly, through ritual and memory. Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, and others begin their long journey into the Greek imagination. Despite the hardship, this is not a time of total collapse. It is a time of quiet rebuilding. Communities learn to rely on themselves. Power becomes local. Leadership shifts from kings to strong families and warrior elites. Loyalty is personal, not bureaucratic. Honor matters more than law. Reputation becomes a kind of currency. Burial practices change too. The dead are honored with simple graves at first, then gradually with richer offerings. Pottery, once plain, begins to show patterns again. At first, they are simple lines and shapes. Circles, waves, triangles. This style, later called geometric, marks the first artistic heartbeat after the collapse. It is a sign that creativity is returning. Trade also begins to stir. Slowly, cautiously, Greeks start sailing again. They reconnect with nearby islands and coastal regions. Phoenician traders appear, bringing goods and ideas from the east. With them comes something revolutionary, a new form of writing. The Greeks adapt the Phoenician alphabet, shaping it into something uniquely their own. For the first time, vowels appear in writing. Language finds a permanent form again. This moment changes everything. Writing returns, not as palace accounting, but as expression. Names, dedicatory offerings, short messages. Slowly, the spoken stories of the past begin to crystallize. The epics attributed to Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey emerge from this long oral tradition. They are not history in the modern sense, but they carry deep memories of the collapse, the wandering, the loss, and the hope of return. By the late 9th century BCE, something new is forming. Villages grow larger. Settlements become more organized. A new kind of community begins to appear, one that will define Greek civilization. The polis, the city-state. It is still fragile, still developing, but it carries a powerful idea. Identity tied not to a king, but to a shared place and shared laws. The darkness is lifting, slowly. The Greek world is waking up, changed by centuries of struggle. The people no longer remember the palaces as real places. They remember them as stories, and from those stories, they begin to build something entirely new. A culture shaped not by empire, but by competition, debate, and ambition. As the first true city-states begin to rise, and Greeks look outward once more, a new age approaches, one filled with exploration, conflict, and creativity. reshape the Mediterranean forever. And just beyond this fragile rebirth, the archaic period waits, ready to pull Greece into the light, whether it is ready or not. As the Greek world slowly stirs from centuries of silence, the land itself seems to breathe again. Hills once dotted with lonely huts now hold growing settlements. Smoke rises from more hearths. Paths turn into roads. People begin to think beyond survival. They begin to think about belonging. This is the moment when the polis truly begins to form. At first, it is not grand. A polis is not yet marble temples or crowded marketplaces. It is simply a community that sees itself as one body. Families cluster together for protection. Fields are shared and defended. A central meeting place emerges, often nothing more than open ground where elders gather to talk, argue, and decide. Over time, this space will become the agora, the heart of Greek public life. Power during this period is unstable. Kings still exist in some places, but their authority is weak. Instead, leadership is held by aristocrats, wealthy landowning families who claim noble ancestry. Many trace their bloodlines back to heroes of the distant past. Whether these claims are true matters less than the belief in them. In a world without written proof, reputation is reality. These aristocrats control land, weapons, and religious roles. They lead in war. They judge disputes. They host feasts that reinforce loyalty and status. Yet their power is personal, not absolute. A leader who fails in battle or dishonors the gods can be challenged. Violence is never far away, but neither is negotiation. Warfare itself begins to change. In the Dark Ages, fighting was small and chaotic. Now, as populations grow, warfare becomes organized. The hoplite emerges, a citizen soldier armed with shield, spear, and helmet. Battles are no longer heroic duels of legendary champions. They are disciplined clashes of lines, shield against shield, man against man. Victory depends on unity, not individual glory. This shift quietly reshapes Greek society. To fight as a hoplite, one must afford armor. Those who can fight demand a voice. Slowly, the idea spreads that political rights should be tied to military service. If you defend the city, you deserve a say in how it is run. This idea will one day explode into democracy, but for now, it simmers beneath the surface. Religion grows alongside politics. The gods become more defined, more human, more powerful. Zeus is no longer just a sky god, he is king of gods. Athena becomes protector of cities. Apollo brings order and prophecy. Sanctuaries expand. Pilgrimages begin. Greeks travel long distances to consult oracles, especially the one at Delphi, where Apollo's voice is believed to speak through a priestess in trance. Delphi becomes the spiritual center of Greece. City-states ask it whether to wage war colonies or pass laws. The oracle's answers are often vague, poetic, and dangerous to misinterpret. Yet no one dares ignore them. To anger the gods is to invite disaster, and disaster is always close. As city-states grow stronger, they grow more competitive. Land is limited. Resources are scarce. Tension rises. Some communities face hunger. Others feel trapped by geography. The solution, surprisingly, lies across the sea. Greeks begin to sail again, not just to trade, but to settle. This movement, known later as colonization, is not driven by empire, but by necessity and ambition. Groups of settlers leave their home cities to found new ones along distant coasts. Southern Italy, Sicily, the shores of the Black Sea, North Africa. These new polis remain tied to their mother cities through religion and tradition, but they are politically independent. Each colony spreads Greek language, customs, and gods. The Mediterranean begins to change. What was once a collection of isolated cultures becomes a network connected by Greek ships, ideas, and rivalries. Trade flourishes. Grain flows back to Greece. Metals, pottery, and stories move across the sea. With wealth comes inequality. As trade enriches some families, social tensions deepen. Aristocrats grow richer. Farmers fall into debt. In many cities, this imbalance reaches a breaking point. Riots erupt. Factions clash. The old system can no longer hold. Out of this chaos rises a new figure, the tyrant. In modern language, the word sounds cruel, but in ancient Greece, a tyrant is simply someone who seizes power outside traditional rules. Often, tyrants rise with popular support. They promise land reform, debt relief, and justice. Some rule harshly. Others bring stability and growth. Under tyrants, cities build temples, walls, and public works. Art and poetry flourish, even as political freedom shrinks. Poetry, especially, becomes a powerful voice of the age. Poets no longer sing only of gods and heroes. They speak of love, anger, exile, and injustice. Hesiod writes of hard work, morality, and the struggles of ordinary life. Lyric poets like Sappho and Alcaeus give voice to personal emotion, something rare in the ancient world. Through their words, we hear the heartbeat of archaic Greece. Art changes too. Pottery evolves from simple geometric patterns to scenes of myth and daily life. Figures gain movement. Faces show emotion. The human body becomes a subject of fascination, not just decoration. Sculptors experiment with stone, creating stiff but ambitious statues known as kuroi and korai. Young men and women frozen between tradition and innovation. All of this signals a civilization finding confidence again. Yet, beneath the growth lies tension. Every city-state believes itself unique. Everyone claims divine favor. Alliances form and break. Wars flare up, small at first, then larger. Honor, pride, and revenge guide decisions as much as reason. The Greeks are no longer emerging from darkness. They are stepping into a harsh, bright world where success brings envy and failure brings ruin. The age ahead will test every idea they have rebuilt. Leadership, justice, freedom, and identity. And as rival cities sharpen their spears and sharpen their laws, two powerful forces begin to rise in opposite corners of Greece, shaping paths that will soon collide and change history forever. As the archaic world continues to take shape, Greece no longer feels like a quiet land finding its footing. It feels restless. Every city-state is alive with ambition, fear, and pride. The Greeks are no longer just surviving. They are competing. And competition, once awakened, never sleeps. Each polis begins to define itself more sharply. Customs harden into laws. Traditions become identity. A man is no longer just Greek. He is Spartan, Athenian, Corinthian, or Milesian. Loyalty to the city becomes sacred, sometimes stronger than loyalty to family. To betray one's polis is to betray oneself. Nowhere is this sense of discipline and identity more intense than in Sparta. Sparta does not grow like other cities. While others trade, debate, and experiment, Sparta chooses a different path, surrounded by fertile land and threatened by rebellion from conquered peoples known as Helots. Sparta reshapes itself into a permanent military camp. From birth, life is controlled by the state. Weak infants are rejected. Strong ones are trained for war. Boys leave their families at a young age to enter the agoge, a brutal system of discipline, endurance, and obedience. Hunger is constant. Pain is expected. Silence is praised. The goal is simple: create soldiers who fear shame more than death. Even women are trained physically, not to fight, but to raise strong children and manage estates, while men are away at war. Sparta's system is harsh, but effective. It creates stability, unity, and terrifying military power. Other Greeks watch with a mix of fear and admiration. Sparta becomes a symbol of order, discipline, and sacrifice, but it also becomes a warning of what happens when freedom is surrendered completely to the state. Far to the east, another city is growing in a very different way. Athens does not train its children for silence. It teaches them to speak. It is not ruled by one system, but torn between many. Aristocrats compete for power. Farmers struggle under debt. Laws are unclear and often unfair. Blood feuds erupt. The city teeters on the edge of chaos. To prevent collapse, Athens turns to law. The first attempt is brutal. Draco writes laws so harsh that later Greeks say they were written in blood. Death is the punishment for even minor CRMS. The idea is fear. Order through terror. It fails. Violence does not disappear. Resentment grows. Then comes Solon. Solon is not a tyrant or a king. He is a reformer, a poet, a man trusted enough to rewrite the rules. He cancels debts. He frees those enslaved for failing to pay. He reorganizes political power based on wealth rather than birth, allowing more citizens to participate. He does not create democracy, but he cracks the door open. Solon knows his reforms are fragile. After finishing his work, he leaves Athens, traveling abroad so he cannot be pressured to change the laws. The city he leaves behind is calmer, but far from stable. Power struggles return. Eventually, a tyrant named Pisistratos seizes control. Unlike many tyrants, Pisistratos rules carefully. He keeps Solon's laws. He supports farmers. He funds festivals, temples, and the arts. Under his rule, Athens grows richer and more confident. Poetry thrives. Myths are organized and recorded. The city begins to see itself as special, destined for greatness. Yet tyranny never lasts. After Pisistratos' sons fall, Athens faces another crisis. This time, it chooses a radical solution. A system where citizens vote, debate, and decide together. Democracy is born slowly, imperfectly, and with deep exclusions. Women, slaves, and foreigners are left out. But for free male citizens, power now flows upward, not downward. This idea will change the world, but it also creates tension. Democracy encourages argument, pride, division. Athens becomes brilliant and unstable, creative and dangerous, while Sparta and Athens grow into opposite models. The wider Greek world is also transforming. Colonies flourish into major cities. Syracuse becomes powerful in Sicily. Miletus shines in Asia Minor, rich from trade and ideas. These Eastern Greek cities come into contact with ancient civilizations far older than Greece itself. Egypt, Babylon, Lydia. From them, Greeks learned astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. They begin to ask new questions, not just how to honor the gods, but how the world works. What is matter made of? What causes storms? What is justice? In Ionia, thinkers like Thales and Anaximander look at nature and seek rational explanations. The universe becomes something that can be understood, not just feared. This shift is quiet, but revolutionary. The roots of science are planted here in the Archaic Age. At the same time, myth remains powerful. Gods still intervene. Omens still matter. Before battles, sacrifices are made. Before voyages, prayers are whispered. Rational thought does not replace belief. It sits beside it, uneasy but growing. War continues to shape everything. City-states fight over land, honor, and revenge. Alliances form leagues. Victories are celebrated with statues and poems. Defeats bring humiliation and exile. Warriors who fight bravely are remembered. Cowards are shamed for life. The battlefield becomes a proving ground for citizenship and masculinity. Yet Greeks do not fight only each other. Beyond the Aegean, a massive power is rising. The Persian Empire stretches across Asia, swallowing kingdoms and cities with terrifying speed. Its kings rule millions. Its armies seem endless. To many Greeks, Persia feels distant, almost unreal. For now, trade with Persia brings wealth and tension. Some Greek cities submit willingly. Others resist quietly. Rumors spread of Persian strength, organization, and ambition. Few realize how deeply this empire will soon reach into Greek affairs. As the Archaic period moves forward, Greece is no longer a recovering land. It is a vibrant, divided, ambitious world. Its cities shine brightly, but their light casts long shadows. Every innovation creates new conflict. Every solution brings new problems. The Greeks are building something extraordinary, but they are doing it on unstable ground. And as their cities grow louder, richer, and more confident, the distant thunder of a coming storm begins to roll across the horizon, promising a test that will push every idea, every city, and every citizen to the breaking point. By the late Archaic period, the Greek world feels crowded with energy. Every city-state is alive with movement, argument, ambition, and fear. The old simplicity of the Dark Ages is long gone. In its place stands a network of fiercely independent polis, each convinced of its own importance, each guarding its traditions like sacred fire. The land is no longer quiet. It hums. In the countryside, farmers work harder than ever. Population growth has stretched land to its limits. Small plots are divided again and again between sons until survival becomes a daily struggle. Debt hangs over many households like a shadow. A bad harvest can mean loss of land, loss of freedom, even slavery. This tension never fully disappears, even in the most prosperous cities. Beneath temples and festivals, anxiety lives close to the surface. In the cities, public life grows louder and more complex. The agora is no longer just a meeting place. It is a battlefield of words. Citizens argue about laws, war, trade, and honor. Voices rise. Accusations fly. Persuasion becomes a weapon as sharp as any spear. Those who can speak well gain power. Those who cannot are pushed aside. Slowly, a new kind of elite emerges, not based only on birth or wealth, but on influence. Art mirrors this change. Sculptures grow more confident. Bodies are carved with greater realism. Muscles tighten. Faces hint at emotion. Artists are no longer just copying older forms. They are experimenting, asking how stone can capture life. Temples grow larger and more refined. Columns follow rules of proportion. Architecture becomes a statement of civic pride. A city shows its power not only through armies, but through beauty. Religion, too, becomes more public and political. Major sanctuaries like Olympia, Delphi, and Delos draw Greeks from every region. Here, rival cities meet not only to worship, but to compete. Athletic games become sacred contests. Runners race, wrestlers clash, and victors are crowned with wreaths, not gold. Glory, not wealth, is the prize. To win is to honor both city and gods. To lose is to accept fate. The Olympic Games grow into something greater than sport. They become a pause in warfare, a moment when Greeks remember they share a culture, even as they prepare to fight each other again. For a brief time, weapons are set aside, and competition takes another form. But the truce never lasts long. Back in the cities, political tension continues to rise. Tyrannies fall one by one. Some are overthrown by angry citizens. Others collapse under their own excess. In their place, new systems struggle to form. Oligarchies tighten control in some cities, keeping power in the hands of the few. Elsewhere, broader participation begins to take root. Though always uneven and fragile, exile becomes a common punishment. Political losers are driven out, forced to wander or seek refuge in other cities. These exiles carry bitterness with them. They form plots. They wait for chances to return. Greek politics becomes a cycle of revenge, reform, and retaliation. Stability is rare. Change is constant. At the same time, warfare becomes more organized and more devastating. Hoplite armies grow larger. Battles are planned carefully, fought fiercely, and decided quickly. The clash of shields, the push of bodies, the fear and noise, all define the experience of war. Victory brings honor and land. Defeat brings shame and loss. There is little mercy. The battlefield does not forgive mistakes. Yet even as Greeks fight each other, they are increasingly aware of the world beyond their borders. Traders bring news from Egypt, Phoenicia, and Mesopotamia. Stories circulate of vast empires where kings rule by divine right and armies march for months without stopping. Compared to these giants, Greek cities seem small, fragile, almost insignificant. This awareness creates both fear and pride. Fear, because Greeks know they could never match such empires alone. Pride, because they believe their way of life is superior. They value freedom, debate, and personal honor. They see themselves as different, sharper, more alive. This belief begins to harden into identity. In Asia Minor, Greek cities live under constant pressure from the east. Lydia rises and falls. Then Persia arrives, absorbing kingdoms with terrifying efficiency. Persian administrators are calm, organized, relentless. Some Greek cities submit, paying tribute in exchange for protection. Others resist quietly, clinging to autonomy while watching the horizon. The idea of resistance grows slowly. At first, it is not heroic. It is cautious, uncertain, even divided. Some Greeks argue that submission is practical. Others call it shameful. The question of freedom versus survival becomes impossible to avoid. What is a city without independence? What is life without choice? Poets and thinkers reflect these tensions. Their words grow sharper, more political. They speak of justice, fate, arrogance, and the danger of excess. The concept of hubris takes shape, the belief that pride invites divine punishment. This idea seeps into every part of Greek thought. Success must be balanced. Power must be restrained. To forget limits is to invite ruin. As the archaic period nears its end, Greece stands at a crossroads. Its cities are wealthy, creative, and confident, but also divided and restless. Old wounds remain open. New ambitions push outward. The Greeks have rebuilt their world from darkness, but they have not found peace. Beyond the Aegean, the Persian Empire continues to expand, its shadow stretching closer each year. And within Greece itself, rival cities sharpen not only their weapons, but their ideas of who they are and what they stand for. The stage is being set for a confrontation that will test every belief the Greeks hold dear and force them to choose between submission, unity, and survival. As the archaic period moves toward its breaking point, tension fills the Greek world like heat before a storm. Everything feels heavier now. Every decision matters more. Every mistake carries greater consequences. The cities are no longer experimenting. They are committing to paths that will define them for generations. In Asia Minor, the pressure becomes unbearable. Greek cities along the coast, rich and sophisticated, live under Persian rule. At first, Persian control is light. Local customs are respected. Taxes are paid. Life continues. But resentment grows quietly. Greeks are used to arguing with their leaders, criticizing them, even overthrowing them. Under Persia, authority is distant and unquestionable. Orders come from faraway kings, whose faces most Greeks will never see. The spark finally comes in Miletus. Aristagoras, a local ruler trapped by debt and fear, makes a desperate choice. He calls for rebellion, not purely out of love for freedom, but out of survival. The Ionian revolt begins suddenly, violently, and with reckless hope. Cities rise together. Persian garrisons are attacked. For a moment, it feels possible. For a moment, the Greeks believe they can shake off the weight of empire. They turn to mainland Greece for help. Athens sends ships. Eretria joins in. It is not a massive force, but symbolically, it is everything. Greek fights Greek no longer. Greek fights empire. Together, the rebels burn the Persian city of Sardis. Flames licking the sky, smoke rising like a signal across Asia. The message is clear. Persia can bleed. But empires do not forget. Persia responds slowly, deliberately, with overwhelming force. City by city, the rebellion is crushed. Miletus is destroyed. Its people are killed or enslaved. dream collapses. For the Greeks of Asia Minor, the cost of resistance is unbearable. For Persia, the lesson is simple: Greece is dangerous. And for Athens, the consequences are unavoidable. By helping the rebels, Athens has drawn the attention of the most powerful empire on earth. Persian kings do not forgive. They remember. Somewhere in the vast halls of Persia, names are spoken. Athens, Eretria. These cities are marked. Back in mainland Greece, life continues, but with a new undercurrent of fear. News travels fast. Stories of Persian armies spread endless ranks, disciplined archers, cavalry that darkens the horizon. Some Greeks dismiss these tales as exaggeration. Others take them seriously. The question spreads quietly from city to city. What happens when Persia comes here? Not all Greeks answer the same way. Some cities argue for submission. Pay tribute. Avoid destruction. Preserve life. Others insist that freedom is worth any cost. Athens, fresh from its democratic reforms, becomes a loud voice for resistance. Sparta listens carefully, but says little. Its leaders understand war. They understand patience. They wait. Inside Athens, democracy hardens under pressure. Citizens are no longer just debating laws and festivals. They are debating survival. Ostracism is introduced, a strange and powerful tool. Citizens can vote to exile anyone they believe threatens the state. No crime is required. Fear alone is enough. It is democracy defending itself, but it is also democracy showing its sharp edge. Athens begins to prepare. Ships are built. Silver from the mines at Lorient is turned into triremes. Sleek warships designed for speed and impact. The sea becomes Athens' strength. Not walls, not land armies, the open water. This choice will shape everything that follows. Meanwhile, Sparta watches. Sparta is cautious, bound by tradition and prophecy. Kings consult oracles before acting. Religious festivals dictate military timing. To outsiders, this looks like hesitation. In reality, it is calculation. Sparta knows Persia is different from any enemy Greece has faced. This will not be a border dispute or a brief clash of hoplites. This will be a test of endurance. Across Greece, alliances form slowly, awkwardly. Old enemies speak through clenched teeth. Trust is thin. Every city fears betrayal. Who will stand? Who will kneel? No one knows. Unity is fragile, and Persia is patient. Culture continues to evolve even as war looms. Tragedy begins to take shape in Athens, born from older choral traditions. Stories of gods and heroes are retold with darker edges. Fate becomes cruel. Justice becomes complex. Audiences are asked not just to admire heroes, but to question them. These plays reflect a society wrestling with power, responsibility, and fear of destruction. Philosophical thought deepens too. Questions about law, nature, and morality grow sharper. What makes a law just? What gives a ruler authority? Is freedom worth suffering? These questions are no longer abstract. They are urgent. Religion tightens its grip as well. Omens are watched closely. Sacrifices increase. Oracles are consulted again and again. Some messages offer hope. Others warn of ruin. Interpretation becomes dangerous. To misunderstand gods will consume a city. As years pass, the sense of waiting becomes unbearable. Then, at last, the waiting ends. Persia moves, not with haste, but with certainty. Armies assemble. Ships gather. Orders flow outward like ripples in water. The goal is no longer punishment alone. It is domination. The Persian kings intend to bring Greece fully under their control, to erase the idea that small cities can defy a world empire. For the Greeks, there is no turning back now. Old rivalries must be set aside, or they will be destroyed one by one. Decisions made in fear, pride, and desperation will soon be tested on the battlefield. The archaic world, built through centuries of struggle and creativity, stands on the edge of annihilation. And as Persian forces move westward, crossing land and sea, the Greek city-states prepare for a moment that will define them forever. One where courage, unity, and sacrifice will collide with overwhelming power, and history will hold its breath. The moment Persia truly arrives in the Greek world, everything changes. What had once felt like distant danger now becomes immediate, physical, and terrifying. The ground itself seems to tremble under the weight of the empire moving west. Persian messengers travel ahead of the armies, carrying a simple demand to every Greek city they reach: earth and water, a symbol of submission. Some cities comply without resistance, choosing survival over pride. Others hesitate. A few refuse outright, sealing their fate. Athens does not hesitate. When Persian envoys arrive, demanding submission, they are thrown into a pit. In Sparta, they are cast into a well and told to find earth and water there. These acts are shocking, even reckless. They are also irreversible. From this moment on, there will be no compromise. Greece has declared, in the bluntest possible way, that it will not kneel. Persia responds not with rage, but with preparation. The first great test comes in 490 BCE. A Persian force lands on the plains of Marathon, not far from Athens. The choice of location is deliberate. Flat land favors Persian cavalry and archers. The message is clear. Resistance will be crushed quickly and publicly. Athens faces a nightmare scenario. Its walls are weak. Its army is small. Sparta, bound by religious festival, cannot march immediately. For a moment, Athens stands alone. Inside the city, fear spreads like fire. Citizens know what happens to rebels. They have heard the stories from Ionia: destruction, enslavement, erasure. Yet there is no mass panic. Something else takes hold. Resolve. The Athenians march out to meet the Persians, not because victory is certain, but because submission feels worse than death. The Battle of Marathon is fast, brutal, and astonishing. Against every expectation, the Athenian hoplites charge. Shields crash. Spears drive forward. Persian lines buckle. The heavily armored Greeks push relentlessly, refusing to break. In a matter of hours, the Persian force collapses. Survivors flee to their ships. Athens has won. The victory echoes across Greece like thunder. Marathon becomes more than a battle. It becomes proof. Proof that Persia is not invincible. Proof that citizen soldiers can defeat an empire. For Athens, it is a defining moment, shaping identity, pride, and confidence for generations. For Persia, it is an insult that cannot be ignored. In the years that follow, both sides prepare. Persia does not rush. It plans. A new king, Xerxes, inherits not only an empire, but a mission. Greece must be conquered, not just punished. Resources are gathered on an unimaginable scale. Bridges are built across the Hellespont. Canals are carved through mountains. Armies are assembled from across the empire, representing dozens of cultures, languages, and fighting styles. The scale is overwhelming. Meanwhile, Greece argues. City-states meet, debate, accuse, and hesitate. Old grudges resurface. Trust is fragile. Some cities argue that resistance is madness. Others insist that unity is the only hope. Slowly, painfully, a defensive alliance forms, led by Sparta on land and Athens at sea. It is not perfect. Many Greeks remain neutral or openly side with Persia. Greece is not united by love, but by fear. Athens makes a radical choice. Under the influence of Themistocles, the city commits fully to naval power. Homes are abandoned. Families are evacuated. Athens itself will be sacrificed if necessary. The fleet becomes the city. This decision is heartbreaking and bold. It transforms Athens from a land-based power into a master of the sea. When Xerxes finally invades in 480 BCE, the invasion feels unstoppable. The Persian army moves south like a living force of nature. Cities fall or submit. The Greek alliance scrambles to delay the advance. The first stand is made at Thermopylae, a narrow pass where numbers matter less. Spartan King Leonidas leads a small force, knowing the odds. The goal is not victory. It is time. The stand at Thermopylae becomes legend. For days, Greeks hold the pass. Persian attacks fail again and again. Discipline and terrain balance the numbers, but betrayal opens a path around the defenders. Leonidas dismisses most of the army and stays with a small group, fighting to the death. Their sacrifice slows Persia, but it cannot stop it. Athens is burned. The city is empty, The destruction is symbolic and devastating. Temples are destroyed. Sacred spaces are violated. Smoke rises from the Acropolis. To the Persians, it is conquest. To the Greeks, it is sacrilege. The war is no longer just political. It is personal. At sea, the decisive moment comes at Salamis. In narrow waters, the Persian fleet loses its advantage. Greek ships strike hard and fast. Confusion spreads. Persian coordination collapses. The sea fills with wreckage. Against all odds, the Greeks win again. Xerxes watches from the shore as his fleet is destroyed. The invasion falters. The following year, Persian forces are defeated on land at Plataea and at sea at Mycale. The great invasion ends not with total annihilation, but with retreat. Persia remains powerful, but Greece survives. Survival changes everything. The archaic world cannot return to what it was. Small city-states have faced an empire and endured. Confidence surges. Pride hardens. Athens, in particular, emerges transformed. Its navy dominates the Aegean. Its democracy feels proven by victory. Its sense of destiny grows. But victory also plants dangerous seeds. Power shifts. Old alliances strain. Athens begins to lead not just defensively, but assertively. Tribute replaces cooperation. Influence becomes control. What began as unity against Persia slowly turns into competition between Greeks themselves. The shadow of empire has passed, but a new struggle is already forming, one born not from fear of conquest, but from ambition and rivalry. And as Greece steps beyond the archaic period into a new age of brilliance and conflict, the victories that saved it may soon threaten to tear it apart. The Persian threat fades slowly, like a storm retreating toward the horizon. But the marks it leaves on Greece are deep and permanent. Burned temples are rebuilt, not just as places of worship, but as monuments to survival. Stories of Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea are repeated endlessly, growing larger with every telling. These victories become the backbone of Greek identity. Greece now sees itself not as a fragile collection of cities, but as a civilization that stood against the greatest power on earth and did not break. Yet triumph brings imbalance. Athens, more than any other city, emerges transformed. Its fleet controls the sea lanes. Its harbor at Piraeus hums with activity. Trade pours in from across the Aegean. Silver flows. Artisans multiply. Foreigners arrive, bringing goods, accents, and new ideas. Athens feels alive in a way no Greek city ever has before. Confidence fills the air, but so does restlessness. Sparta watches this rise with growing unease. Sparta won the war on land. Athens won it at sea. The alliance that held Greece together during the Persian invasions now feels awkward, strained by different visions of power. Sparta believes leadership should be cautious, restrained, and traditional. traditional. Athens believes leadership should be active, bold, and expanding. Neither side trusts the other, but neither is ready for open conflict. Out of this tension grows a new structure, the Delian League. Officially, it is a defensive alliance created to protect Greek cities from any future Persian threat. Member cities contribute ships or money. Athens leads the fleet. At first, the idea feels reasonable. Persia still exists. The memory of invasion is fresh. Unity feels necessary. But leadership quickly turns into control. Athens begins to demand tribute instead of voluntary contributions. League funds are moved from Delos to Athens itself. Cities that try to leave are punished. Fleets are sent. Walls are torn down. Democracy is encouraged where it benefits Athens, suppressed where it does not. What was once cooperation becomes empire, even if the word is never spoken aloud. Inside Athens, this power fuels an explosion of creativity. The city rebuilds itself in stone and marble. The Acropolis rises again, more magnificent than before. Temples are designed not just to honor the gods, but to display Athenian greatness. Sculptors perfect the human form. Painters experiment with depth and movement. Drama evolves into tragedy and comedy, becoming sharper, darker, and more reflective. The theater becomes a place where Athens talks to itself. Plays question power, fate, justice, and war. Heroes are no longer flawless. Gods are no longer always just. Audiences are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about pride, violence, and responsibility. This cultural confidence is breathtaking, but it is also dangerous. Athens begins to believe that its way of life is not just successful, but superior. Democracy deepens, but so does division. Citizens argue constantly. Assemblies stretch for hours. Persuasion becomes an art form. Charismatic leaders rise and fall quickly. Popular support can lift a man to greatness or destroy him overnight. Freedom of speech thrives, but so does manipulation. The system is powerful, but unstable, always one bad decision away from disaster. Meanwhile, life for ordinary Athenians changes dramatically. Rowers, craftsmen, and laborers gain influence because the empire depends on them. Naval power requires manpower. For the first time, the poorest citizens feel their importance recognized. This strengthens democracy, but it also creates tension with traditional elites who feel their status slipping away. Outside Athens, resentment grows. Former allies feel trapped. Tribute drains resources. Local traditions are ignored. Revolts flare up and are crushed. Athens justifies its actions as necessary for security, but others see hypocrisy. The city that once spoke of freedom now enforces obedience. Sparta, meanwhile, remains rigid and cautious. Its society does not change easily. Art remains simple. is controlled. Foreign influence is limited. Sparta fears internal corruption more than external threats. But this rigidity has a cost. Sparta struggles to adapt to a world shaped by naval power and money. It relies on allies, watches Athens grow stronger, and waits. Across Greece, smaller city-states feel squeezed between giants. They are forced to choose sides, often against their will. Neutrality becomes impossible. The Greek world divides into camps. Old friendships are tested. Old grudges return. Every dispute feels heavier now, because it is no longer just about local land or honor. It is about influence, ideology, and survival. Philosophical thought continues to expand in this charged atmosphere. Thinkers question tradition openly. They ask whether laws come from gods or humans, whether justice is absolute or relative, whether power corrupts by nature. These ideas spread through conversation, debate, and education. They inspire curiosity, but also suspicion. To question too much can seem dangerous in a world built on shared beliefs. Religion remains strong, but more complex. Gods are still honored, but their actions are debated. Are disasters punishments? Are victories signs of favor or human achievement? Greeks begin to wrestle with the idea that fate and choice are intertwined. This tension appears everywhere, in plays, speeches, and daily life. As Athens' influence expands, so does fear. Sparta fears encirclement. Allies fear loss of autonomy. Athens fears rebellion and isolation. Each city believes it is acting defensively, even as it prepares for conflict. Words grow sharper. Accusations multiply. Trust erodes. The memory of Persian invasion once united Greece. Now the memory fades, replaced by new anxieties. Greeks no longer look east in fear. They look at each other. The world that emerged from the Dark Ages has reached a peak of confidence, creativity, and power. But that same confidence begins to twist into arrogance. The balance that once held city-states in check is breaking. The question is no longer whether Greeks can survive an external enemy. The question now is whether they can survive themselves. And as alliances harden and preparations begin quietly on both sides, the Greek world moves toward a conflict that will be longer, more destructive, and more tragic than anything it has faced before. A war not against empire, but against fellow Greeks, where victory will cost more than anyone yet understands. The war that finally breaks out does not arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, through suspicion, insults, and small acts of aggression that feel manageable at first. No one announces it as inevitable. No one believes it will last as long as it does. And yet, by the time the first real blows are struck, the Greek world is already trapped inside it. The Peloponnesian War begins not with a single battle, but with a collapse of trust. Athens Athens and Sparta stand at the center, surrounded by allies who feel more like prisoners than partners. Treaties exist, but they are thin, worn by years of tension. Every dispute between smaller cities threatens to pull the giants in. When conflicts erupt in places like Corcyra and Potidaea, they act like sparks thrown into dry grass. Old promises are invoked. Old fears are awakened. Suddenly, restraint feels like weakness. Sparta declares war. The decision is heavy and reluctant, shaped by fear of Athenian dominance more than desire for conquest. Sparta believes Athens must be checked before it becomes unstoppable. Athens, for its part, believes war is unavoidable and prepares to fight on its own terms. Neither side truly understands what it is about to unleash. Athens retreats behind its walls. Its strategy is defensive, almost coldly rational. Avoid land battles with Sparta's superior army. Rely on naval power. Let the countryside burn if necessary. The city will survive as long as its fleet controls the sea. It is a brutal calculation, one that sacrifices farmers and villages for long-term survival. As Spartan armies march through Attica, smoke rises from fields and homes. Crops are destroyed. Trees are cut down. The land that once fed Athens is ruined season after season. Refugees flood into the city, crowding behind the walls. Tension rises. Disease spreads. Then comes the plague. It arrives quietly, carried by ships and packed bodies. No one understands it. No cure exists. Fever, pain, madness, death. The sick pile up in the streets. Social order collapses. Laws are ignored. The gods seem silent. Even the strong fall quickly. Among the dead is Pericles, the man who shaped Athenian strategy, democracy, and empire is gone. His vision dies with him. Athens survives the plague, but it is changed. Harder, more desperate. Leadership becomes unstable. Ambition replaces caution. Demagogues rise, promising victory through boldness rather than patience. The war spreads outward. Battles erupt across Greece and its colonies. Sea fights, land clashes, sieges, raids. Victories are temporary. Losses are constant. Cities switch sides. Alliances fracture. Civilians suffer most. Entire populations are displaced, enslaved, or slaughtered. The war is no longer heroic. It is exhausting, cruel, and endless. Moral boundaries begin to erode. One of the darkest moments comes on the island of Melos. Neutral and weak, it refuses to submit to Athens. The Athenians argue not with justice, but with power. The strong do what they can. The weak suffer what they must. When Melos resists, its men are killed, and women and children are enslaved. The message is unmistakable. Idealism has no place left. Sparta, too, changes. Forced to adapt, it experiments with new tactics. It builds a fleet with Persian support. Gold flows in from the east, ironic and bitter. The former enemy becomes a silent partner. Sparta justifies this alliance as necessity. Principles bend under pressure. The war grinds on year after year. Generations grow up knowing nothing else. Children become soldiers. Veterans become bitter. Hope fades. Even victories feel hollow. Every city is poorer. Every temple feels heavier. The shared Greek identity that once united resistance against Persia now feels distant, almost mythical. Athens makes a fatal gamble. Driven by ambition and the promise of total victory, it launches a massive expedition against Sicily. The plan is bold, complex, and reckless. Commanders argue. Omens are ignored. Warnings go unheard. The fleet sails anyway, carrying thousands of men and the last reserves of Athenian confidence. The expedition is a disaster. Trapped, outnumbered, and cut off, the Athenian force is slowly destroyed. Ships burn, soldiers starve. Survivors are captured, imprisoned, and worked to death. The news returns to Athens like a death sentence. The city has lost not just an army, but belief in itself. Enemies close in. Revolts spread through the empire. Allies defect. Sparta presses harder. Athens fights on, wounded but stubborn. Democracy itself falters, briefly replaced by oligarchy, then restored again. The city refuses to surrender, even as resources vanish. At last, the end comes. Athens' fleet is defeated. The walls come down. The empire collapses. Sparta stands victorious, but there is no celebration worthy of the name. Greece is ruined. No city has truly won. Wealth is gone. Trust is shattered. The balance of power lies in pieces. The war ends, but peace does not heal. Sparta struggles to rule a world it never wanted. Athens struggles to recover its voice. Smaller cities lie broken, resentful, exhausted. The old certainties of the archaic and early classical world are gone. The belief that Greek freedom guarantees virtue has been shattered by Greek cruelty. Yet, even in ruin, Greece does not stop thinking. Questions linger in the smoke and silence. What is justice when survival is at stake? What is freedom without restraint? Can power exist without corruption? These questions will not fade. They will shape everything that comes next. Because from the wreckage of war, new ideas are already forming. New leaders are watching. And while Greece may be weakened, its story is far from over. In the aftermath of its greatest self-destruction, the Greek world prepares, unknowingly, for another transformation, one that will redefine power, philosophy, and the meaning of unity itself. By the time the archaic world had fully awakened, Greece no longer felt like a collection of scattered villages clinging to memory. It felt connected, not united in one state, not peaceful, not equal, but connected by shared rhythms, shared stories, and shared sacred spaces. A man in Corinth could recognize the gods of a man in Chios. A sailor from Euboea could walk into a sanctuary in Sicily and understand the rituals. Across mountains and seas, a quiet cultural web had formed, and at its center stood religion, art, poetry, and the growing sense that to be Greek meant something larger than one city's walls. Religion in this age was not distant or abstract. The gods were everywhere. They lived on mountain peaks and in olive groves, at city gates, and inside hearth fires. Zeus watched from the sky. Athena guarded cities. Apollo spoke through oracles. Poseidon shook the earth beneath the sea. These gods were not perfect. They argued, loved, cheated, punished, and forgave. And because they felt human, people felt close to them. Sacrifice was not only obligation, it was conversation. Wine poured on stone, smoke rising into the air, prayers spoken aloud. In return, people hoped for protection, guidance, and favor. Across Greece, sanctuaries grew into powerful centers of identity. Delphi sat on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, wrapped in mist and mystery. There, Apollo's oracle spoke through a priestess who inhaled sacred vapors and delivered riddling prophecies. Kings and tyrants, farmers and colonists, all came seeking answers. Should they found a city, wage war, change their laws? Delphi did not command, it hinted, and those hints shaped history. Olympia, set in a green valley of the Peloponnese, honored Zeus. Every 4 years, Greeks laid down their weapons and gathered for games. Men competed naked, their bodies oiled, racing, wrestling, throwing discus and javelin. There were no medals, no money, only a wreath of olive leaves and everlasting fame. Poets recorded victories. Cities boasted of champions. For a brief moment, Greeks saw each other not as enemies, but as rivals under the same gods. These Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries did something powerful. They reminded people that despite political division, they shared blood, language, and belief. A Corinthian might hate an Argive. A Spartan might despise an Athenian. But all bowed before Zeus. All listened to Apollo. All knew the same myths. Slowly, the idea of Hellas began to form not as a nation, but as a shared world. Art in the archaic age reflected this growing confidence. Sculpture moved away from stiff, symbolic shapes and toward the human form. Stone figures known as kura, young male statues, stood upright, 1 foot forward, arms at their sides. Their faces wore the famous archaic smile, not because they were happy, but because artists were learning how to shape life into stone. Each generation carved bodies more naturally. Muscles tightened, proportions improved. What began as imitation became exploration. Greeks were studying themselves. Pottery became a canvas for storytelling. Black figure vases showed heroes battling monsters, gods watching from above. warriors marching to war. Later, red figure pottery reversed the colors, allowing finer detail and emotion. These images traveled across the Mediterranean, carried by traders and settlers. In Etruria, in Egypt, in the Levant, people drank wine from Greek cups and absorbed Greek myths with every sip. Poetry, too, evolved. Homer's epics still echoed in halls and festivals, but new voices emerged. Hesiod spoke of work and justice, of farmers struggling against harsh land and harsher neighbors. Lyric poets like Sappho and Alcaeus wrote of love, longing, and political exile. Their poems were personal, emotional, sung to the sound of the lyre. History was no longer only about heroes and gods. It was about people. And then, quietly, something revolutionary began. Some Greeks started asking not what the gods wanted, but how the world itself worked. In cities like Miletus, thinkers wondered what everything was made of. Water, air, fire. They looked at nature and searched for patterns. This was not disbelief. It was curiosity. The birth of philosophy did not reject myth. It stood beside it, asking new questions in a very old world. Meanwhile, warfare was changing. The hoplite phalanx had become the dominant force on the battlefield. Rows of heavily armed citizens marched shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears angled forward. Victory no longer depended on a single hero, but on discipline and unity. War became faster, deadlier, and more equal. A farmer could fight beside an aristocrat, and that shared risk changed politics. As hoplites gained power, demands grew louder. If a man could die for the city, should he not have a voice in it? Across Greece, political tension simmered. Old aristocracies clung to privilege. New wealth challenged old blood. In many cities, tyrants rose, not always cruel, often popular men who seized power by promising fairness, stability, and reform. Some tyrants built roads and temples. Others sponsored art and festivals. But tyranny was fragile. It depended on loyalty, fear, and success. And when it failed violently. Cities learned hard lessons about power, ambition, and trust. Colonies continued to expand Greek influence. From the Black Sea to southern France, Greek cities dotted foreign shores. They carried language, gods, and customs with them. Yet they also changed. Local traditions blended with Greek ways. The Greek world grew wider, more diverse, and more complex. By the late Archaic period, Greece stood at a crossroads. It was richer, stronger, and more confident than ever before. But it was also restless. Social tensions simmered. Political experiments pushed boundaries. Ideas moved faster than laws. The old world of kings and heroes was fading, but the new world had not yet fully arrived. In the background, beyond the Aegean, powerful empires were watching. Lydia had already fallen. Persia was rising. Its reach extended westward, closer each year. The Greek cities of Asia Minor stood directly in its path, and the choices they would make would shake the entire Greek world. The Age of Awakening was nearing its end. Ahead lay conflict on a scale Greece had never seen, and as the shadows of empire stretched across the sea, the fragile unity of the Greek people was about to be tested in fire, blood, and legend, leading us into the final turning point of this long and dangerous journey. The world beyond the Aegean was changing faster than most Greeks realized. While city-states argued over laws, land, and honor, a vast empire had been growing to the east, quiet at first, then unstoppable. Persia was not just another kingdom. It was a machine of power, stretching from the deserts of Central Asia to the rich valleys of Mesopotamia. Its kings ruled over many peoples, many languages, many gods. Roads crossed mountains. Messengers rode day and night. Armies moved like storms. And sooner or later, the Greek world would be forced to look east and decide who it was. The first Greeks to feel Persian weight were not in mainland Greece, but across the sea in Ionia. These cities, Miletus, Ephesus, Samos, were Greek in language and culture, but they sat on the edge of empire. When the Persians conquered Lydia, the Ionian cities passed quietly into Persian hands. At first, life did not change much. Local tyrants ruled under Persian approval. Taxes were paid. Trade continued. The empire did not crush them. It watched them. But resentment grew. Greeks were used to arguing with their rulers, not kneeling before distant kings. In the early years of the 5th century, rebellion broke out. The Ionian revolt was chaotic and desperate. Cities rose together, burned Persian outposts, and even attacked Sardis, a major imperial center. For a moment, it seemed possible. Athens and Eretria sent ships in support. Flames lit the night. Hope spread. Then Persia responded. The revolt was crushed with patience and overwhelming force. Cities were destroyed. Populations were moved. Miletus, once a jewel of Greek thought, was left broken. For the Persians, this was not just rebellion. It was a lesson. The western coast was unstable. The Greeks were unpredictable, and the cities that had helped, especially Athens, had drawn the attention of the great king himself. Across the Aegean, word spread slowly. Stories came on merchant ships. Cities whispered of Persian strength. Some laughed it off. Others prepared. Sparta watched carefully. Athens, still young in its new political form, felt exposed. The old archaic world of internal struggle was giving way to something larger. The enemy ahead was not another city. It was an empire. At the same time, Athens was changing from within. Tyranny had fallen. Reforms had reshaped the city. Power was spreading outward to citizens who had once been silent. Assemblies met. Votes were cast. Leaders rose and fell through public choice. It was messy, loud, and uncertain, but it gave the city energy. For the first time, many Athenians felt the city belonged to them. This sense of ownership mattered, because when danger came, it was not a king who would decide. It was the people. Persia tested the Greek world carefully. Envoys arrived, demanding earth and water, symbols of submission. Some cities agreed. They reasoned that resistance was foolish. Persia was too large, too rich, too powerful. Others refused. In Athens, the envoys were killed. In Sparta, they were thrown into a well and told to find their earth and water there. It was a declaration, quiet but absolute. The line had been drawn. The first invasion came across the sea. Persian forces landed, moving methodically along the coast. The Greek response was uncertain. Many cities hesitated. Some waited to see who would win. Only a few stood firm. When the Persians reached the plain of Marathon, outside Athens, the moment arrived sooner than anyone expected. The battle was fast, brutal, and shocking. Heavily armored Athenian and Plataean hoplites charged across open ground into a larger Persian force. Against all expectation, they won. Persian troops broke and fled to their ships. The plain was left littered with bodies. Greece had faced the empire and survived. But Marathon was not an ending. It was a warning. Persia did not forget. It prepared. In the years that followed, Greece argued with itself even as danger grew. Some wanted walls. Others wanted ships. Athens, guided by sharp-eyed leaders, chose the sea. Silver from newly discovered mines was turned into triremes, sleek warships built for speed and ramming. The city became a naval power almost overnight. Elsewhere, alliances formed reluctantly. Old enemies were forced into cooperation. Sparta, land-focused and cautious, accepted leadership on land. Athens would command the sea. It was not unity born of trust, but of necessity. When the Persians returned, they came in overwhelming force. The army crossed bridges over the Hellespont. The fleet darkened the water. Cities burned as the invasion moved south. Greek resistance was brave, but costly. At Thermopylae, a small force delayed the Persian advance in a narrow pass. When they fell, they became legend, but the road lay open. Athens was abandoned. Its people fled to ships and islands. The city was burned. Temples collapsed. Smoke rose over the Acropolis. It was the darkest moment Greece had ever known. And yet, in that darkness, resolve hardened. At sea, Greek ships gathered. Narrow waters favored skill over numbers. When the fleets met, oars splashed, hulls crashed, and chaos ruled. The Persian navy, vast but unwieldy, broke apart under Greek attack. The sea filled with wreckage. The empire had been stopped again, this time decisively. The final blow came on land. Greek hoplites met Persian forces and pushed them back. step by step, shield against shield. When the invaders finally withdrew, the Greek world stood battered but unbroken. The archaic age ended not with silence, but with survival. What followed would be something new. Confidence born of victory. Memory forged into myth. The city-state would reach heights never imagined during the dark centuries after Mycenae's fall. Art, philosophy, drama, and power would flourish in ways that reshaped the world forever. But all of that lay ahead. For now, Greece stood at the edge of a new era, aware at last of its strength, haunted by what it had nearly lost, and forever changed by the moment it chose to stand together against the greatest force it had ever faced. In the wake of the Persian invasions, Greece found itself in a world both familiar and startlingly new. The old rhythms of city life, which had once been punctuated by seasonal harvests, religious festivals, and local skirmishes, now pulsed to a larger, almost electric current of possibility and tension. Cities that had barely survived the threat of empire now discovered an unexpected confidence. Athens, in particular, had tasted the intoxicating mixture of triumph and power. Its citizens realized that their collective will, disciplined and united, could overcome what once seemed impossible. Yet this newfound strength brought its own burdens, a restless energy, a desire not only to defend, but to expand, to dominate, and to shape the world according to its vision. Athens' rise to prominence did not go unnoticed. While the city was still celebrating victories at sea and rebuilding the burnt temples of the Acropolis, rival city-states watched closely. Sparta, ever cautious, had emerged as a champion of land power, its armies undefeated in the field. Corinth, with its wealth and strategic location on the isthmus, sought influence wherever possible. Smaller cities, fearful of Athens' growing reach, hesitated between alliance, neutrality, or covert opposition. The Greek world had changed. The unity forged in the fires of Persian invasion was dissolving, replaced by suspicion, rivalry, and ambition. This period became one of intense political experimentation. Athens, now more confident than ever, refined its democracy. Assembly meetings grew longer, speeches more persuasive, and decisions more binding. Leaders like Themistocles had already demonstrated the power of vision. But new men emerged to challenge the old ways, debating the direction of the city-state. Citizens, once limited to minor roles, now had real stakes in matters of war, policy, and finance. This empowerment, while exhilarating, brought a sharp edge. Public opinion could make or unmake anyone overnight. Ambition, eloquence, and cunning became as valuable as courage on the battlefield. Yet the city's expansion and the rising confidence of its people had a shadow side. Tribute from allied cities, meant to fund the Delian League's protection against Persia, began to feel more like taxes imposed by an empire voluntary contributions to a defensive pact. Athens' fleets patrolled the Aegean with authority, sometimes brutally enforcing compliance. Cities that resisted or sought neutrality found themselves isolated, punished, or coerced. While Athens spoke of democracy and freedom, its neighbors began to see coercion and control. Resentment simmered, even as the city flourished. The tension between Athens and Sparta deepened, crystallizing around philosophy as well as strategy. Sparta remained rigid, cautious, and inward-looking. Its society revered discipline above all else, training men from youth to defend the city-state with their lives. But while Sparta excelled at military precision, it lacked the flexibility and wealth of Athens. The Peloponnesian League, Sparta's alliance network, became a counterweight to Athenian influence, ready to act when Athens overstepped. The stage was set for confrontation, not out of hatred, but out of competing visions of power and the shape of the Greek world. During this time, culture did not stagnate. On the contrary, the archaic and early classical periods of Greek history gave rise to extraordinary artistic and intellectual achievements. Sculptors experimented with anatomy, balance, and expression. Painters on vases captured movement, emotion, and myth with astonishing clarity. Epic and lyric poetry flourished, chronicling the deeds of men and gods alike, exploring human desire, ambition, and the consequences of hubris. Drama began to emerge, not merely as entertainment, but as reflection, critique, and instruction. The stories of heroes and their flaws mirrored the challenges of city-states themselves: pride, courage, failure, and the fragile line between triumph and disaster. Philosophy, still in its infancy, began to ask questions no ruler or poet could answer. Thinkers in Ionia and beyond wondered about the nature of existence, the elements that formed the world, and the principles governing life. These early inquiries were not abstract, they were urgent. Greeks had seen the fragility of human life in war and plague. They had witnessed the rise and fall of cities, the cruelty of ambition, and the whims of gods and men alike. Knowledge became a tool, not just for survival, but for understanding one's place in a vast and unpredictable world. Meanwhile, Athens' empire grew outward. Colonies and allied cities sent tribute, and the wealth poured back to Piraeus, Athens' bustling port. Artisans thrived, farmers became traders, and the city's population swelled. Yet each success came with risk. Military campaigns strained resources. Political disputes became more intense. Revolts, small at first, began to echo across the Aegean. The empire's expansion brought not security, but complexity. Every decision in Athens now reverberated hundreds of miles away, sometimes with unpredictable consequences. As Athens consolidated its naval dominance, it increasingly saw itself as the guarantor of Greek identity. Temples were rebuilt to outshine the past. Festivals became spectacles of civic pride. Art, theater, and literature served a dual purpose: to celebrate achievement and to reinforce the legitimacy of power. The Acropolis, standing tall above the city, became a visual symbol of what Athens had survived and what it could achieve. It was both sacred and political, divine and human, but the Greek world was still fragile. Memory of the Persian invasions lingered, reminding city-states of the cost of disunity. Yet that unity had been temporary, forged under external threat. With the enemy's shadow receding, old rivalries, grudges, and ambitions reasserted themselves. The same mountains, seas, and rivers that connected the Greeks also divided them. Trade and communication were possible, but so were blockade, betrayal, and conflict. Survival had taught them strategy. Prosperity would test their character. In this moment, Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers, stood poised on a knife's edge. Athens embodied innovation, ambition, and democratic confidence. Sparta represented tradition, discipline, and military excellence. Allies watched, cities maneuvered, and philosophers observed the patterns of human behavior in this charged atmosphere. The Greek world had grown larger, more sophisticated, and infinitely more dangerous. And so, as the archaic and early classical periods drew to a close, Greece faced a choice. Could it use its collective wisdom, artistic genius, and military skill to build a lasting civilization? Or would internal rivalries, ambition, and pride undo everything the Greeks had achieved? The answers were not yet clear, but the stage was set for the greatest dramas, the fiercest battles, and the most enduring stories the ancient world would ever know. A world where the line between glory and ruin would be thinner than ever. By the time the mid-5th century approached, the Greek world was a complex tapestry of ambition, culture, and tension, each thread pulled by its own desires. Athens, riding the waves of its naval supremacy, had transformed from a city recovering from foreign invasion into a hub of power and influence. Every harbor, every road, every port carried the echo of Athenian authority. And yet, for all its strength, the city teetered on the edge of overreach. Its democracy, brilliant and innovative, demanded participation from citizens whose expectations were growing faster than the city's ability to satisfy them. Assemblies ran late into the night, with rhetoric soaring and tempers flaring. Debates about war, tribute, and colonization raged, while the specter of tyranny, both real and perceived, haunted every decision. Leadership was no longer merely a matter of skill. It was a test of persuasion, cunning, and endurance. Across the Peloponnese, Sparta remained the mirror of discipline and order. Its citizens were trained from birth to live for the city, to obey without question, to fight without hesitation, Spartan life was austere, deliberate, and deeply controlled, unlike Athens, where change and ambition were celebrated. Sparta feared innovation, fearing the erosion of social cohesion. Wealth was limited, art was restrained, and foreign influence was treated with caution. Yet, this rigidity was both a strength and a weakness. Spartan armies were unmatched on land. Their hoplite phalanxes, a perfect blend of coordination and discipline. But Sparta struggled to adapt to the shifting currents of maritime power, diplomacy, and the growing reach of Athenian influence. Smaller cities, caught between these two poles, struggled to maintain their autonomy. Some tried to navigate the currents through neutrality, others through cunning alliances. But neutrality became increasingly fragile. Tributes, treaties, and promises pulled at them from both sides. Some revolted against Athenian control, only to face crushing military retaliation. Others leaned on Sparta for protection, risking Athenian wrath. The Greek world, once loosely connected by shared language and belief, now found itself fractured by politics, ambition, and fear. At the heart of these tensions was the evolution of warfare itself. The hoplite phalanx, perfected over decades, remained the cornerstone of land combat. Heavily armored citizens marched shoulder to shoulder, spears bristling forward, shields overlapping, forming a wall of disciplined strength. Yet, the real innovation lay at sea. The Athenian trireme, a fast, agile, and deadly vessel, allowed the city to project power across the Aegean and beyond. Oars moved in perfect unison. Ramming prows cut through enemy hulls, and strategic coordination became a decisive factor. Athens' dominance of the waves was as much about discipline as it was about resources. A well-trained crew could defeat numerically superior forces through skill, timing, and audacity. Culture, meanwhile, thrived under these conditions of both conflict and prosperity. Athens became a laboratory for human achievement. The Acropolis rose, adorned with temples and statues that rivaled the imagination of the gods. Sculptors captured anatomy, emotion, and movement with unprecedented realism. Painters decorated vases with scenes that told stories of heroism, trickery, and human folly. Drama became a vehicle for reflection, teaching audiences about pride, justice, and the consequences of their choices. Tragedy examined the limits of human ambition. Comedy exposed the absurdity of power and the folly of arrogance. Philosophy, still young, began asking questions that challenged convention. Thinkers in Miletus, Athens, and beyond wondered about the nature of existence, the origin of matter, and the principles that governed life. They observed the world with curiosity, seeking natural explanations for phenomena once attributed solely to the gods. This intellectual awakening did not replace religion. It coexisted, even clashed, providing a richer, more nuanced understanding of the universe. Humans, they realized, could question, reason, and discover. This subtle shift laid the groundwork for ideas that would outlast empires, wars, and rulers. Yet with brilliance came fragility. Athens' growing empire, though formidable, was vulnerable to internal dissent and external challenge. Tribute payments bred resentment. The democracy, while empowering, made decisive action difficult. Leadership was constantly tested. Ambition, rhetoric, and fear intertwined, creating a combustible political environment. Every decision, from funding military campaigns to approving colonization, carried risks for both the city and its empire. The stage was set for another great confrontation. Sparta, uneasy and watchful, sensed Athens' expansion could not continue unchecked. Other city-states, jealous or fearful, began forming their own leagues, alliances, and conspiracies. The memory of Persian invasions lingered, reminding Greeks of the fragility of survival. But internal conflict now loomed larger than any foreign threat. The balance of power in Greece was delicate, maintained by cautious diplomacy and the occasional display of force. One misstep, one spark, could ignite a conflagration that would engulf the entire region. Even as tensions mounted, Greek civilization continued to flourish in unexpected ways. Colonization spread Hellenic culture along coastlines and across islands, blending with local traditions to create hybrid communities that were both Greek and new. Trade networks expanded, connecting cities with distant lands and enriching not only merchants, but also ideas, art, and philosophy. Religion, art, and civic identity intertwined, reinforcing the sense that Greeks, despite differences, were part of something larger. But these achievements existed alongside a growing awareness of mortality and fragility. War, disease, and political upheaval had left scars on generations. Memory of the Persian invasions was vivid. Stories of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis were recounted to inspire courage and caution. Athens and Sparta, allies once and now rivals, embodied both the potential and the peril of human endeavor. Every victory carried lessons. Every defeat left wounds. And every choice would shape the trajectory of the Greek world. As the century advanced, the Greek city-states faced an uncertain future. Prosperity had given rise to ambition. Innovation had brought both creativity and risk. Victory had produced confidence and fear in equal measure. And at the heart of it all, the question persisted. Could Greece maintain its remarkable achievements? Or would internal rivalry overreach and pride destroy what generations had built? The answer, as history would soon reveal, would come not gradually, but in sudden, dramatic bursts of conflict, courage, and catastrophe, where the lessons of the past would collide with the ambitions of the present, and the fate of an entire civilization hung in the balance. By now, the Greek world was a landscape of both extraordinary achievement and simmering tension. Athens had grown in wealth, culture, and confidence, its democracy a beacon for its citizens, and its navy a symbol of power that could dominate the Aegean. Sparta remained the formidable land power, disciplined, implacable, and vigilant, unwilling to allow Athens' ambitions to go unchecked. Between these two giants, smaller city-states navigated a treacherous middle ground, trying to survive, to profit, or to influence the course of events without drawing the wrath of either side. Every decision mattered. Every alliance could tip the balance of power. Athens, having recovered and prospered after the Persian threat, was no longer content with defense alone. Its leaders, inspired by victories and buoyed by resources, sought to shape the world. The Delian League, originally founded as a mutual alliance against Persia, increasingly became a vehicle for Athenian expansion. Tribute collected from allied cities fueled the construction of the Parthenon, a symbol not only of devotion to Athena, but also of Athens' cultural supremacy. Artists, architects, and sculptors poured their talent into this grand project, transforming marble into visions of divine perfection. The city itself became a statement. Athens was not merely a city, it was an idea made tangible. Yet, with greatness came risk. The more Athens demanded, the more resentment grew. Cities that had once welcomed Athenian protection now bristled at control. Revolts flared, and Athens responded with force, projecting power across the sea with a ruthlessness that mirrored the very empires they had once resisted. Military expeditions punished disobedience. Political maneuvering ensured that allies remained obedient. The line between leadership and domination blurred, and the city's moral authority began to fracture. Even as its influence expanded, Sparta watched silently but deliberately. The Peloponnesian League, bound together by loyalty and fear, remained a check against Athenian expansion. Sparta's land-based military strength was unmatched. Its hoplites were a wall of discipline and endurance. While Athens commanded the seas, Sparta commanded the plains. And as Athens' power grew, so too did Sparta's determination to contain it. The tension between the two powers was like a taut rope, ready to snap with the slightest provocation. Meanwhile, culture in Greece continued to flourish in extraordinary ways. Philosophy, still young but growing, began to challenge assumptions about the natural world, human behavior, and the role of the divine. Thinkers like Anaxagoras and Heraclitus began asking questions that were daring for their time. What is the fundamental substance of the universe? How do humans understand truth? Could reason, rather than myth, guide understanding? These ideas, radical and exciting, spread through cities and schools, laying the foundation for an intellectual revolution that would would outlast wars and empires alike. Art, too, reached new heights. Sculptors captured the human form with precision, moving beyond the stiff courbe of the archaic period to depict bodies in motion, faces alive with emotion, and figures that conveyed both beauty and narrative. Faces illustrated epic tales, battles, gods, and everyday life, creating a visual record that was as informative as it was captivating. Drama emerged as a mirror for society, reflecting human ambition, pride, and folly. Tragedies like those of Aeschylus and Sophocles examined the consequences of hubris, the delicate balance between human will and fate, and the complex interplay of justice, revenge, and mercy. Comedy simultaneously allowed audiences to laugh at the absurdities of life, politics, and the human condition. Despite this cultural brilliance, the seeds of conflict were everywhere. Athens' empire was growing, but so was its ambition, and ambition breeds tension. Sparta and its allies feared the consequences of unchecked Athenian power. Smaller city-states were often caught in the crossfire, pressured to choose sides. Diplomacy became a delicate dance. But in an environment so charged with pride, fear, and historical memory, the margin for error was razor-thin. One insult, one betrayal, one misjudged act of aggression could trigger war. That spark finally arrived. Disputes over colonies, trade, and alliances escalated. Minor conflicts, once contained locally, began to pull the great powers into confrontation. Athens, confident in its navy and its democracy, pressed its advantage. Sparta, grounded in discipline and wary of encroachment, prepared its armies. The Peloponnesian War, which had been a distant possibility for years, became inevitable. It was a war that would test not only strategy and strength, but endurance, courage, and the very nature of Greek civilization itself. The early campaigns were brutal. Athens relied on its ships to strike at distant enemies, while Sparta dominated the land. Both sides suffered losses, and both sides learned that victory could be fleeting. The war dragged on, sometimes in sudden, violent bursts, other times in long sieges that tested patience and resilience. Cities burned, fields were devastated, refugees fled to safer regions, only to find new dangers. Disease and famine accompanied armies, and the suffering of ordinary citizens became a constant, haunting shadow of the conflict. As the war unfolded, the character of Greek society was revealed in stark detail. Athens' democracy, once celebrated as a triumph of collective governance, was tested to its limits. Leadership was scrutinized, policies debated fiercely, and citizens demanded results, even as the costs mounted. Sparta, with its disciplined oligarchy, demonstrated resilience and strategic patience, but also rigidity that limited its adaptability. The Greek world, at its peak, culturally and militarily, faced perhaps its greatest existential challenge: how to survive as a civilization when its own divisions threatened to destroy it from within. And yet, in the midst of this turmoil, the brilliance of Greece persisted. Philosophy, art, and drama continued to evolve, reminding all that human creativity and inquiry could endure even in the shadow of destruction. The lessons of hubris, courage, and resilience were etched into every story, every monument, every poem. Greece was not only fighting for survival, it was defining what it meant to be Greek, what it meant to live with intelligence, beauty, and ambition in a world filled with peril. The Peloponnesian War would continue to test the limits of cities and citizens alike. But from the chaos, patterns of human behavior, political strategy, and cultural achievement were emerging that would resonate for centuries. The stage was set for dramatic triumphs and tragic losses, for lessons in leadership, loyalty, and the delicate balance between freedom and power. A story that would shape not only Greece, but the entire trajectory of Western civilization. And so, as cities rebuilt, fleets prepared, and poets chronicled the lives of men and gods, Greece stood on the cusp of transformation, knowing that the choices made in the coming years would determine whether its greatness would endure or crumble under the weight of its own ambition. As the Peloponnesian War dragged on, the Greek world became a landscape scarred by conflict, yet alive with extraordinary human endeavor. Cities that had once thrived under peace now endured siege, famine, and disease. Athens, confident in its walls and fleet, faced challenges that no strategic plan could fully anticipate. The plague, striking suddenly and without mercy, tore through the city, killing thousands and weakening the population. Leaders fell, citizens despaired, and the very notion of divine favor seemed uncertain. Yet, even amid devastation, the human spirit persisted. Art continued, literature thrived, and the lessons of survival, courage, and resilience were etched into every corner of Greek life. Sparta, too, was tested. Its disciplined armies held the field, but the war's prolongation strained resources and alliances. Political tension simmered at home, and the rigid system that had sustained Sparta for generations showed cracks. Other city-states, weary from years of conscription and tribute, grew restless. Diplomacy became a weapon as vital as the spear. Envoys traveled tirelessly, weaving promises and threats to maintain fragile loyalty. The Greek world, once bound by shared language, religion, and culture, now wrestled with the bitter reality that unity was ephemeral and fragile. Yet from this chaos, brilliance emerged. Philosophy flourished as thinkers pondered not only the natural world, but also human behavior, ethics, and governance. Socrates challenged Athenians to examine their lives, their values, and the meaning of virtue. artists pushed boundaries, capturing both suffering and triumph in sculpture, painting, and theater. Tragedy became a mirror for society, reflecting pride, ambition, and the cost of hubris. Comedy offered relief, laughter, and critique, showing that even in darkness, human creativity could endure. Colonization and trade, despite war, continued to spread Greek culture across the Mediterranean. Hellenic ideas, art, and religion reached distant lands, blending with local customs and creating hybrid communities. The Greek world expanded not only through conquest, but through influence, shaping a cultural and intellectual sphere that would endure far beyond the immediate struggles of war. The war itself, however, demanded immense sacrifice. Strategic brilliance alternated with devastating failure. Cities fell, alliances shifted. Athens' empire, built on naval supremacy, was challenged not only by Sparta, but by its own overextension. Every decision carried consequences that rippled across the Aegean. The balance between ambition and caution, between pride and prudence, became the central question of survival for the Greek world. And yet, even as battlefields ran red with blood, the Greek mind continued to explore, create, and question. Ideas about democracy, ethics, and human potential flourished alongside strategies of war and survival. The interplay between conflict and culture, between necessity and curiosity, defined the era. The Greek world was not simply surviving. It was evolving, learning, and preparing for what would come next. Part 15. In the war's aftermath, Greece emerged transformed. Athens, despite eventual defeat, had demonstrated the power of collective will, naval innovation, and cultural achievement. Sparta, victorious on the field, struggled to maintain the unity and influence that had brought it success. Smaller cities navigated a world reshaped by conflict, adjusting to new power dynamics while preserving their own identities. The Greek world had been tested in every way militarily, politically, and culturally, and had endured. From the ruins of war came renewal. Athens rebuilt its temples and monuments, channeling the lessons of disaster into artistic and architectural triumph. Philosophers and playwrights reflected on the human condition, the nature of power, and the consequences of pride. History, literature, and oral tradition preserved the stories of heroes and ordinary citizens alike, creating a shared memory that would inspire generations to come. The political landscape, though unstable, offered opportunities for innovation. Democracy, oligarchy, tyranny, and alliances were constantly negotiated, each experiment shaping the understanding of governance, citizenship, and justice. Cities learned that power was not permanent, that fortune could shift, and that vigilance, wisdom, and courage were necessary for survival. Trade and colonization, once slowed by conflict, resumed with renewed vigor. Greek culture spread farther than ever before, influencing regions from the Black Sea to southern Italy and beyond. Art, literature, and philosophy carried the ideals, stories, and questions of Greece into new lands, leaving a legacy that would endure long after armies had faded from the fields and harbors. The Greek Dark Ages and Archaic period, once defined by hardship, uncertainty, and isolation, had given way to a civilization capable of extraordinary achievement, from scattered villages to thriving city-states, from fear of invasion to daring innovation, from rigid tradition to daring inquiry. Greece had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The myths, art, philosophies, and political experiments of this era would not only define the identity of Greece, but also shape the foundations of Western civilization for centuries. And so, standing on the edge of the classical era, the Greek world faced the future with the knowledge that it could endure, adapt, and create. Its history was a tapestry woven from struggle, triumph, loss, and discovery. A story of people, gods, and ideas interlacing across centuries. The lessons of the past remained vivid. Unity and division, pride and humility, ambition and caution. And as Greece looked forward, it carried the legacy of the Dark Ages and Archaic period into a new era, ready to face challenges, embrace innovation, and leave a mark on the world that would never be forgotten.